The alarms were already screaming when Daniel Rivers realized he had made a terrible mistake. He stood inside the old metal workshop, the one every inmate feared, watching sparks fly across the room as a huge machine shook like it was about to break apart. The air smelled like burning wires. A loud cracking sound cut through the noise, and Daniel froze. The belt on the giant press, one of the most dangerous machines in the whole prison, had snapped clean off and was whipping around the room like a wild animal. Officers were yelling. Inmates were diving for cover. Smoke was filling the air. And Daniel, he was stuck right in front of it. The machine slapped the metal table in front of him, sending tools flying. One tool, a heavy wrench, slid across the floor and stopped right at his feet. He didn't know it yet, but what happened in the next few seconds would change everything inside Black Ridge Penitentiary. And it all started with a job no inmate wanted. But to understand how Daniel ended up there, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the day he learned what kind of work he would be forced to do. Daniel had been in Black Ridge for only 3 weeks when the officers called him into the job assignment room. Everyone whispered about that room. It was where inmates were sent to hear what job they'd be stuck with: kitchen work, laundry duty, yard cleanup, or worse. Some jobs were safe. Some were dangerous. And some were so bad that inmates prayed every night not to be chosen. Daniel sat in a metal chair across from Officer McCall, a tall man with tired eyes and a voice that sounded like a locked door. "Rivers, age 28, right?" McCall said, flipping through a folder. "Yes, sir." "You worked construction before you got here?" Daniel nodded, his stomach twisting. McCall shut the folder. "But that means you're going to the workshop." Daniel felt his chest tighten. Everyone knew what the workshop meant. It wasn't just a workroom. It was the place with the machines. Old machines. Loud machines. Machines that were barely repaired. Inmates joked that the workshop felt older than the prison itself. But nobody really joked. Not for long. The next morning, Daniel walked into the workshop for the first time. The room smelled like oil and dust. Long metal tables were covered with tools that rattled every time the machines vibrated. The air was hot. The machines were huge, taller than him, with moving parts that clanged and screeched like angry animals. "Inmates on the left. Tools on the right," shouted Mr. Carson, the civilian supervisor. He was the only person who seemed calm in the workshop. But even he didn't look fully comfortable. He kept glancing at the machines like he didn't trust them either. Daniel started on simple tasks: sorting scrap metal, cleaning tools, carrying supplies. Not easy jobs, but safe enough. He didn't mind. But in prison, safe enough never lasts long. 3 days later, everything changed. Mr. Carson called Daniel over. "Rivers, we're short today. You're moving to the press." Daniel's heart dropped. The metal press was the job everybody prayed to avoid. It shook the whole floor when turned on. It made a sound like something heavy falling over again and again. People said if you stood too close, you could feel your teeth vibrating. "But sir," Daniel said quietly, "I've only been here a week." "You'll learn fast," Carson replied, not unkindly, but firmly. "Everyone does." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the press, how fast it moved, how easily someone could get pulled into a moving belt if they weren't careful. Inmates whispered stories about accidents, most of them old, most of them impossible to confirm because nobody ever talked openly about what happened in the workshop. Officers didn't mention them. Inmates didn't repeat them. But the fear was real. By the next morning, Daniel knew he had no choice. Nobody refused assignments in Black Ridge. If you refused, you got punished. So Daniel walked into the workshop, took a deep breath, and stepped up to the machine he didn't want to touch. At first, everything went smoothly. He followed the instructions. He kept his hands far from the moving belt. He listened for odd sounds. Hours passed. Sweat dripped down his back. His arms hurt. But he kept going. Then, just after noon, the machine shuddered. It was small at first. A tiny shake, like someone knocking on the metal. Daniel frowned. Machines weren't supposed to do that. He took one step back. The shaking got louder. Then louder. A sharp, violent crack exploded through the workshop. The belt snapped. It flew toward Daniel, The belt came flying toward Daniel so fast that he couldn't even think. All he saw was a dark blur cutting through the air like a speeding shadow. He ducked without knowing why, dropping to the floor and covering his head. The belt slapped the metal wall behind him with a loud bang that made the whole workshop tremble. Sparks jumped off the machine. Smoke rose in thick gray clouds. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Mr. Carson shouted. But the machine didn't stop. It kept shaking violently, as if it were alive and angry. Daniel crawled behind a metal table, coughing. Tools were rolling everywhere. Officers were yelling at inmates to stay back, but some were too shocked to move. The whole workshop had turned into chaos in seconds. Carson rushed toward the power switch on the far wall, but the closer he got, the worse the shaking became. The lights flickered. One of the overhead bulbs popped and fell, shattering across the floor. Daniel peeked out from behind the table. Carson was almost at the switch. Almost. Then the machine let out a deep grinding noise, the kind that made your whole body freeze. Daniel knew something worse was coming. Carson slammed his hand onto the switch. The machine stopped. Instant silence filled the room. No shaking. No sparks. No noise. Just heavy breathing and the soft ringing in everyone's ears. But the danger wasn't over. "Rivers!" Officer McCall shouted, running in. "Are you hurt?" I don't think so," Daniel said, standing shakily. Other inmates slowly got to their feet. Some were shaking. Some looked angry. Some looked relieved. But all of them knew what this meant. The press machine had failed again. Word would spread. And in prison, bad news never stayed quiet. That afternoon, the workshop was shut down. Officers walked in and out, talking in low voices. Carson kept pacing, rubbing his forehead. McCall scribbled notes on a clipboard. They all looked worried, not just because of the machine, but because of what the machine represented. Black Ridge was already known for giving inmates the jobs nobody wanted. Dirty jobs. Hard jobs. Dangerous jobs. Jobs that were supposed to help keep the prison running, but sometimes looked more like punishment. And everybody knew the workshop was the worst of them all. Daniel sat on a bench outside the room, still trying to calm down. His hands felt shaky. He kept replaying the moment the belt snapped. If he had been half a step closer. He didn't want to finish that thought. A few minutes later, Carson walked over. "Rivers," he said, lowering his voice, "I know that was rough. But you handled it well." Daniel frowned. "Sir, the machine almost." "I know," Carson said quickly. "It's not supposed to happen. The prison's been asking for repairs for months, but things move slow around here." Daniel looked toward the workshop door. "Why do we even use that machine? It's dangerous." Carson sighed. "Because somebody has to. And the prison doesn't have many options." Daniel didn't reply. He understood what Carson meant, even though he didn't like it. Inmates didn't get to choose their assignments. They didn't get to say no. They didn't get to ask for something safer. They were expected to work, no matter what the job was. Later that evening, the inmates were back in their cells. Whispering. Talking. Sharing what they saw. Some inmates were angry, saying the workshop should be shut for good. Others said the officers never cared about safety anyway. And some said this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Daniel lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He kept thinking about the press. About how close he had come. About how many inmates before him had worked the same machine, hoping nothing went wrong. He finally understood the truth about the prison jobs nobody wanted. They weren't dangerous by accident. They were dangerous because nobody on the outside truly saw what happened on the inside. The next morning, Officer McCall stopped at his cell. "Rivers," he said, "the workshop opens again next week. They're moving you to a new assignment." Daniel sat up. "A new job?" "Yes," McCall said. "We can't have you back on the press. Too much risk." Daniel felt a small rush of relief, until McCall added, "You're going to the tunnel crew." Daniel blinked. "What's the tunnel crew?" McCall hesitated, then said, "It's one of the hardest jobs we have. Not many want it. But we need someone who can handle tough work. Report tomorrow morning." He walked away. Daniel stared through the bars, feeling the same sinking feeling he'd felt when they first sent him to the workshop. Whatever the tunnel crew was, it didn't sound good. And deep down he knew. The press machine was just the beginning. The real danger was still waiting. And the job he feared the most was the one coming next.